Welcome back to Close Up and our coverage of the First in the Nation summit that drew several Republican presidential candidates to Nashua on Friday and Saturday. Once again, a lot of focus on foreign policy, considering what's going on right now in the Middle East. Here are our interviews with Mike Pence, Asa Hutchinson, Tim Scott, and Ron DeSantis. Governor, it's been a couple months since we've seen you up here in New Hampshire. What's going on there?
Well, look, we just filed today. We're really excited. And, we've got over 100 days to this primary, a little less than 100 to Iowa. That's when it really starts to matter. And we look forward to being here a lot over the next 100 plus days. And the reason is look, we need leadership in this country. Now is the time to be able to do that. We see the problems at home with the prices, the border. We're now seeing more problems abroad. We need steady, strong leadership, and that's what I'll provide.
What is the path to victory for Ron DeSantis?
Path to victory is to win a majority of the delegates by articulating our message. We see the country struggling. We see the decline. We need to reverse that. We need to usher in an American revival. They can trust me to do it because I've done it as governor of Florida, producing result after result after result. So much of politics nowadays is entertainment. It's chaos. It's palace intrigue. It's not how I operate. I focus on your issues, and we get the job done for the American people, and that's what we'll do.
You need to win Iowa, win New Hampshire, or are you trying to finish a close second?
We're going to win them for sure. Although I was actually in there seeing some of the people that won, some that didn't. But yeah, we're in both of these full tilt, 100%, because really I think the country needs fresh leadership. We need an energetic executive. We need somebody that's going to do what they say they're doing. And I think having somebody that's served this country in uniform is important. And I'm the only one running that can say that. Somebody that has young kids, 6, 5, and 3. We know what parents are going through. We know education. We know all those are so important. I live that every day, and my wife and I take our responsibility raising young kids very seriously. That is a great perspective to have in the Oval Office.
Do you think we all underestimated the grip that former President Trump has on a good chunk of the Republican base?
Now, look, I think the now shows a lot of voters are up for grabs, and there's huge issues at stake here. People need somebody who's going to focus on their issues, not about the past, not about their personal issues, not about any grievances about anybody else, but what the American people need at the border, with the economy, all these different things. And I'm going to be a focused and disciplined president. People know when I get up in the morning, it's not going to be about me, it's going to be about you.
What do you think about how President Trump has responded to what's going on in Israel?
This is the time to be standing with Israel. This is their darkest hour. This is the worst terrorist attack in the history of Israel. Babies are being beheaded. Elderly are being executed. I think for President Trump to be attacking Prime Minister Netanyahu, the Israeli defense minister, saying that Hezbollah, how smart they are, I thought that was absurd, and that's not what we need. We need a unified front to say Israel has a right to defend itself, and they ultimately need to win this war against Hamas once and for all.
Governor, if there's an undecided voter out there, they really like former President Trump, but they're considering you, what is the message to that voter that might still be persuadable?
Well, one, I can serve 2 terms. He can't. He'd be a lame duck. 2, I'm more likely to get elected. He won Florida by 3. I won Florida by 20. And then 3, everything I promised, I delivered on. At this point, we know what we need to do. We need somebody that's going to be disciplined and focused and is going to get the job done on 100% of issues, and I'm that guy.
Senator, given what we saw Hamas do in attacking Israel, what would you like to re-examine in terms of folks who have come across the border and who they might be?
Yeah, listen, the evil that we saw brought upon the nation of Israel is devastating, disgusting, and frankly, just evil. Our reaction should be to heighten our own awareness here at home, which means closing our southern border. As I said several times this week, we've had people from Yemen and Iran arrive in our country through our wide open, insecure, and unsafe southern border. It is time for us to get the job done. So we need the resources from this administration so that we can close our southern border. And I will say, as the next president of the United States, I will make sure that our southern border is closed with a wall. We used a military-grade technology to surveil our southern border, reinstate the remaining Mexico policy, and the asylum policy that reduces the flow. And frankly, the COVID emergency is over. But the fentanyl health emergency is now. We need to reinstate something similar to Title 42 to stem the tide of illegal immigrants coming to our country.
What was your reaction when you saw former President Trump reacting to the situation in Israel, talking about personal issues with Netanyahu and less about the situation at hand?
He was just dead wrong. At the end of the day, what we need is to make sure that there's no daylight, not no daylight, between America and Israel. Their country is at war, and the stakes are incredibly high. What we need is we don't need any voices disparaging Netanyahu, and we certainly do not need the members of Congress in the squad creating division, flying the Palestinian flag outside of Representative Tlaib's office. Those distractions eliminates our single-minded focus on helping Israel achieve the objective of keeping their nation safe.
How do you generate momentum here in New Hampshire? Obviously, the polls show you're very well liked. How do you translate that into numbers?
Well, I think presence. Just keep coming back. One of the things I love about being in New Hampshire, the people are kind, they are generous. They are also intelligent voters. And so the more time I spend in front of them, the better off this campaign will be.
Governor, take us through what your campaign needs to do to show some success here in the next few months.
Well, it's all about the voters, but I think what we have to do is to be in people's homes. We have to visit with the neighbors and to be in small communities and to make my case to them. That's what New Hampshire voters expect. And we have to remember that New Hampshire is a late deciding state. I talked to a political leader here who said it's likely to happen after Thanksgiving, that people will actually decide. So I think it's a little bit premature to get too worked up about where you are in the polls here in New Hampshire. And so I like the fact that I've been here more than 8 times now. I'm in the communities. I'm going to be visiting in homes, and that's how you make a difference here.
Do you think there are artificial pressures on this race? You know, the thresholds for the debate, things like that. Does that make it harder for a candidate who might be late breaking?
Well, it is. It's very different this year because there's somehow this enormous pressure that we have to narrow the field even before New Hampshire gets to vote. And as someone pointed out, we've got a really strong bench, and it gives us an opportunity to showcase that strong bench. But it also gives someone an opportunity to rise to the top through campaigning in New Hampshire, and that's been tradition. That's been the role of New Hampshire, and there's many people that want to cut New Hampshire out of the mix and say, let's narrow the field in advance. I happen to believe in the voters still, and so that's important to me. And you have a lot of candidates that are saying the same thing. And so how do the voters decide? I encourage them to look at the depth of experience, because the proven record, you've actually done that. You've actually balanced the budget. You've actually worked on border security. You've actually addressed the opioid crisis in America. These are the things that are proven in my record, and that depth of experience, I think, sets me apart.
With the situation in Israel, do you think that any idea of a two-state solution is pretty much over at this point?
No, I think you still have to have a two-state solution because Israel doesn't want to own Palestine. They don't, it's the Palestine people, have, certain interests there that are not going to go away. And so I don't think you abandon that two-state solution, but it'll take a different look than it ever has before. The challenge is we just got to get the terrorist groups out of the mix. They have to be destroyed, and we cannot waver from that. And then you look at where we go from there in terms of Palestine.
So, Mr. Vice President, you're the anchor man here at the First in the Nation Summit in terms of delivering the last speech. What is it that sets you apart from the rest of this field that can put you in the White House?
Well, I honestly believe that I'm the most qualified, the most tested, and the most consistent conservative in this race. And I think now, at a time when Joe Biden and the Democrats in Washington, D.C. have made a hash of our economy. We have a crisis at our border, and now we see war breaking out in 2 theaters around the world in the wake of the weakness that this administration has shown on the global stage. Now more than ever, I think Republicans understand that we need tried and true and tested leadership in the White House, and I'm that man.
How close are we to the precipice of like a global-style conflict? You know, people talk about World War I and World War II. It seems like the things that we see happening now could point us in a direction like that in the not-too-distant future.
Adam, weakness arouses evil. It's an unbroken truth of history. That disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan 2 years ago has emboldened the enemies of freedom around the world. I can't imagine that Russia would have invaded Ukraine a year and a half ago without the backdrop of that American failure in Afghanistan. And now we learned this week that Hamas began planning their invasion of Israel, that unconscionable assault claiming the lives of men, women, and infant children 2 years ago. And so I think this is simply a moment that we have to meet with American strength. It's one of the reasons why I've advocated for us to have a show of power in the Mediterranean. And it's one of the reasons why I've said to all of my competitors in this race and to every American leader, we need to be speaking with one voice in this moment that America stands with Israel, and I will.
About 100 days or so left in this primary. How do you get your campaign to where it needs to be?
Well, we're just going to continue to work our hearts out here in the First in the Nation primary state, also back in Iowa, and really all across the country. And I learned a long time ago, Adam, like I told you, that I'm well known, but I'm not known well. The opportunity for people to get to know me, to get to know my family, to understand our long history of commitment to the conservative agenda.